What is going on, Mike Mafia? Your boy TheFlightMike backing in with another video, and seeing as that there is not very much NBA news currently, I figured that we would go back into NBA history and discuss some NBA legends that just did not look right in certain jerseys. Now, bear in mind, these players or these legends could have played a game or two for these teams, or they could have just been in the twilight of their careers trying to chase a ring. Either way, let's get started with the first player that just looks absolutely ridiculous. That's Dominique Wilkins. Take a look at this, man. You may know Dominique Wilkins for his 10 years playing for the Atlanta Hawks as a high-flying scorer. A guy that averaged practically 30 points per game for his entire Atlanta Hawks career, save for his rookie and sophomore year. But did you know that after his time with the Atlanta Hawks, he did spend a year with the Los Angeles Clippers, which he was still very, very effective with. But this guy actually played for the Boston Celtics, the San Antonio Spurs, and then 1 year with the Orlando Magic before finally retiring. When he was with the Celtics, he averaged about 18 points per game. Same when he was with the San Antonio Spurs. But by the time he got to Orlando, he was barely playing anymore. He was averaging about 9 minutes per game, and he was averaging about 5 points per game, and he was 39 at this point. To give you an idea of when he played for Orlando, this is after Shaq left Orlando for the Los Angeles Lakers. This is after Penny Hardaway sustained all of those injuries, so Orlando was going through a gigantic rebuild at this time, and I guess they just figured if they brought in Dominique Wilkins, they could get more fans in the stands, but that didn't really work out because he only played 27 games for the Orlando Magic that year. Now, due to the Last Dance documentary, a lot of you guys may have become acquainted with Mr. Dennis Rodman, but did you guys know that after the Bulls dynasty won their second three-peat, a 37-year-old Dennis Rodman would leave the Chicago Bulls after being released on January of 1999. The Los Angeles Lakers saw an opportunity to give their extremely young core a savvy veteran with tremendous NBA Finals experience. Bear in mind that the year before, the Los Angeles Lakers sent 4 All-Stars to the NBA All-Star Game. These players were Eddie Jones, Nick Van Exel, Kobe Bryant, and Shaq. So the logic was, if you add Dennis Rodman to this exciting young nucleus, then chances are you will get a powerhouse or a team that is at least trending towards a championship. Well, that never materialized, as Dennis Rodman would only play 23 games for the Los Angeles Lakers. But even in the twilight of his career, Dennis Rodman still averaged 11 rebounds per game. He would get released by the Los Angeles Lakers and then sign with the Dallas Mavericks for one last season. And get this, in 12 games for the Dallas Mavericks, he would average 14 rebounds per game as a 39-year-old. He would only play 12 games for the Mavericks, but during this time, he would receive 6 technical fouls, would get ejected twice, and served a 1-game suspension. Dennis Rodman would alienate the Dallas Mavericks, and Steve Nash commented that Dennis Rodman, quote-unquote, never wanted to be a Maverick and therefore was unmotivated. In my opinion, I just feel like they didn't know how to manage Dennis Rodman properly, because 14 rebounds per game as a 39-year-old is absolutely ridiculous. Now, if you think that looks odd, take a look at Patrick Ewing over here. This might be the last good trade that the New York Knicks made, because after 15 years of service with the New York Knicks, the Knicks decided to trade Patrick Ewing to the Seattle Supersonics, who were willing to give up Glenn Rice, Luke Longley, Travis Knight, and a bunch of other players, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and Patrick Ewing would only play for the Seattle Supersonics for 1 year before going on to the Orlando Magic and then finally retiring to take an assistant role with the Orlando Magic. Ewing would only average about 9.6 points per game with the Seattle Supersonics and 6 points per game with the Orlando Magic before finally calling it a career. If you think that's weird, after 17 years with the Houston Rockets, Hakeem Olajuwon would end up getting traded to the Toronto Raptors after not agreeing to re-sign with the Rockets after refusing a $13 million contract. He would get traded to the Raptors for a first-round pick that would end up being the 15th pick in the 2002 NBA draft, but they drafted Bastian Nachbar, a guy who I don't really know who he is. But the Toronto Raptors were finally able to get their budding young star Vince Carter some help in the form of a Hall of Fame center. Unfortunately, Hakeem Olajuwon would only start 37 games and would average career lows in points per game and rebounds per game, averaging 7 points per game and 6 rebounds per game during his lone year in Toronto, after which he decided to call it a career due to a lingering back injury, and that was it for his lone year in Toronto. But still, he looks so interesting in a Toronto Raptors jersey. You'd think after 17 years in Houston, there's no way he'd go anywhere else. Speaking of which, no list like this could be complete without Michael Jordan and his appearance as a member of the Washington Wizards. Now bear in mind, only a few months prior, Michael Jordan decided to use the number 1 overall pick in the 2001 NBA draft in drafting Kwame Brown, which kinda sucks considering the fact that the number 2 overall pick in that year's draft was also a center that was drafted out of high school in Tyson Chandler, and he had a fairly successful NBA career. But Michael Jordan would get so frustrated by the Washington Wizards' lack of progress that he decided to return to the NBA as a player despite being in a front office role with the Washington Wizards. And considering the fact that he was on the wrong side of 30, I'd say Michael Jordan did fairly well on a team that had no business winning any games whatsoever in the Washington Wizards. A team that literally had the number 1 overall draft pick in the 2001 NBA draft ended up going 37-45 underneath the Doug Collins and Michael Jordan regime in their first season. And in their second season, well, they were 37-45 again. After that season, MJ decided to attempt to return to his front office role, to which the Washington Wizards said no because they thought he was a terrible general manager. And to be honest, I really don't blame them. It's not like Michael Jordan made the greatest front office decision. Speaking of players that just looked simply wrong in the jersey that they wore in the latter part of their careers, take a look at this picture of Shaq in a Cleveland Cavaliers jersey. And if a Cleveland Cavaliers jersey doesn't do it for you, how about Shaq in a Celtics jersey? Yes, after losing to the Los Angeles Lakers in the 2010 NBA Finals, the Boston Celtics figured that they needed to figure out an answer to Andrew Bynum. So who better to get on their roster than a former member of the Los Angeles Lakers and a person that really understood the triangle offense in Shaquille O'Neal. Unfortunately, Shaq wasn't able to be much of a difference maker for the Boston Celtics, as he'd only appear in 37 games, and when he would appear, he'd seem extremely out of shape. Shaq would play his final games in the playoffs against the Miami Heat Big Three, but wasn't able to make it back to the NBA Finals in order to face the Dallas Mavericks. We can do an entire video on strange teams Tracy McGrady has been on in of itself, because after playing for the Toronto Raptors, the Houston Rockets, and the Orlando Magic, of course not in that order, Tracy McGrady made many pit stops as a role player. After undergoing microfracture surgery when he was with the Houston Rockets, Tracy McGrady clearly wasn't the same player ever again. So in February of 2010, he would get dealt to the New York Knicks, and during those times, if you went to the New York Knicks at any point of your career after being a very productive player, more likely than not, your career was clearly on the downturn and you were going to go to the New York Knicks in order for your career to officially die. But the Knicks doesn't look so weird for Tracy McGrady, but what did look weird was a year later he would sign with the Detroit Pistons, and a year after that he would sign with the Atlanta Hawks. He would also sign with the San Antonio Spurs, and he almost was successful at ring chasing because the Spurs would make it to the NBA Finals that year, only to lose to LeBron James and the Miami Heat. Tracy McGrady could thank Ray Allen for this moment. We could also give Steve Nash an honorable mention here, as I personally, as a Laker fan, never thought he looked right in a Laker jersey. Unfortunately, Steve Nash wasn't able to see the floor for the Lakers as much as he would like to, and would only suit up for the Lakers 65 times in 2 years. What was even stranger is during the end of that time, Steve Nash was kind of distancing himself from the Lakers and was becoming more of a consultant for the Golden State Warriors, mainly because the offense that he ran in Phoenix was very similar to the offenses that the Golden State Warriors were running at that time. I'm sure he had that connection with Alvin Gentry as well, who was the assistant coach of the Warriors, but pretty much Steve Nash didn't spend a lot of time in Los Angeles due to injuries. Now, another player that might look weird in a different jersey is Paul Pierce in a Wizards jersey, but I think out of every player on this list, Paul Pierce had the most success on this team because he played one season with the Washington Wizards, but he appeared in 73 regular season games and 10 postseason games, and his presence was absolutely felt in the NBA playoffs. During the playoffs, Paul Pierce would have some signature moments, including this game winner to give the Washington Wizards a 2-1 series lead. Later on in the series, when the Washington Wizards were down 3-2, Paul Pierce appeared to have hit another game winner to keep the Washington Wizards season alive. Unfortunately, the time expired before the ball left his hand, and after that, Paul Pierce was kind of a role player, jumping from the Washington Wizards to the Los Angeles Clippers before eventually retiring. Now, if you ask me, the player that looks the absolute weirdest in any jersey is probably Dwayne Wade in this Cleveland Cavaliers jersey. I would have never imagined D Wade teaming up with LeBron James again on Cleveland, but they did, and it wasn't as glorious as you would have thought it would be. In a season where the Cleveland Cavaliers were absolutely desperate to convince LeBron that they would do anything it takes to give him a championship competing roster, they decided to bring Dwayne Wade in, and Wade would not fill a role that you would think he would like to occupy. He played 46 games with the Cleveland Cavaliers, coming off of the bench in all but 3 of them. And at the trade deadline, when the Cleveland Cavaliers decided to completely reset on that roster, Dwayne Wade was traded back to Miami for a second-round pick. I can't help but feel like this is a GM trade because he felt like D Wade didn't belong to the Cleveland Cavaliers, and I guess LeBron didn't want to just leave his buddy hanging when he decided to leave back to Los Angeles, so he decided to trade him back to Miami. But regardless, everything about this picture just looks so weird. From the fact that he's in a Cavs jersey to the fact that he's wearing a number 9 on his jersey as opposed to a number 3. I wanted to end it there, but we can't go without talking about Tony Parker. Like, look at him. He's wearing a freaking Hornets jersey, and I wouldn't understand this move for the life of me. After an entire great career with the San Antonio Spurs, Tony Parker out of nowhere said, okay, I want to go play for the Charlotte Hornets, a team that is consistently in NBA purgatory, not contending for any championships, but not being good enough to draft any good players, and they're consistently in the middle of the NBA hierarchy. And after a year, Tony Parker would retire, but this looks so weird. He's wearing a Hornets jersey. You would have never imagined Tony Parker leaving the Spurs. Think that looks weird? How about when Scottie Pippen finally had an opportunity to prove himself on the Houston Rockets roster? After winning an NBA championship with the Chicago Bulls during the 1998 season, a season known as The Last Dance, Jerry Krause decided to trade the Chicago Bulls franchise second all-time leader in points, assists, and steals to the Houston Rockets in exchange for Roy Rogers and a second-round pick in the 2000 NBA draft. This created an exciting big three of a past-his-prime Hakeem Olajuwon, a past-his-prime Charles Barkley, and Scottie Pippen, who's no longer on the Bulls. Well, during this year, Scottie Pippen played the most minutes he's ever played per game in 40 minutes per game and only averaged 14.5 points, 6 assists, and 6.5 rebounds per game. His points per game are significantly lower than during his time with the Chicago Bulls, but the rest of his numbers check out. After 1 year in Houston, the Rockets decided it's best that they punt on the Scottie Pippen experiment and gear for a rebuild. Pippen would then get traded to the Portland Trail Blazers, where he was most famous for this moment, and after 2 years in Portland, he would return to the Chicago Bulls for the 2003 to 2004 NBA season, but retire after playing just 23 games. Is there any other players that you think just looked absolutely strange in any other jersey? Please let me know in the comment section down below if I omitted a specific player that you think should have been on this list. Aside from that, I'm your boy, TheFlightMike, and I'll catch you guys in our next upload.